When I started climbing, I did not hesitate to jump on the hardest possible things that I could find. I think my first trip to Yosemite, I tried Dominator. I could barely get off the ground, but it didn't stop me from just attacking it with everything I had.
Hey y'all, I'm Ryan Devlin, and welcome to the Struggle Climbing Show, where I talk with elite climbers about their struggles and breakthroughs in training, nutrition, tactics, and mental game. Thank y'all for hanging out with me today. How are you? God, this is such a good conversation. Let me just break away from my hosty intro here for a second to tell you how psyched I am about this episode here. This interview is just hands down one of the most insightful I have ever had on this show. Oh my God, it just keeps delivering solid gold perspectives in beta from start to finish. I am so hyped that you are here. Yes, you. Thank you for being here. You win. Let's go. Okay, back to being hosty. Today, we are chalking up for a chat with one of the most accomplished all-around climbers from comp to boulder to sport to hard trad and beyond. I'm talking about Carlo Traversi. You know it's him because you saw his name in the title. And let me tell you a little bit about some of these accomplishments that are too numerous to name, but a little refresher for you here. In comps, Carlo was dominating for a decade. He's a two-time sport climbing national champ amongst many others. On boulders, Carlo has many FAs to his name, including his proposed V16 or 8C plus Yosemite masterpiece, The Dark Side, now the hardest boulder in all of Yosemite. And honestly, no doubt one of the hardest boulders in the entire world. Who knows if this thing will ever see a repeat? It's so nails sounding. He also has climbed some insanely hard single-pitch trad lines. I'm talking about a second ascent on Meltdown, the 514C or 8C plus line in Yosemite established by Beth Rodden that only has a handful of repeats to this day, and also Magic Line, another nails-hard single-pitch trad line at the same grade in Yosemite. All about the footwork. God, is this guy a master of footwork? We talk a lot about that today. Now, as a sport climber, Carlo has clipped chains on some insanely hard climbs, most notably perhaps Flex Luther, one of the hardest sport climbs here in the US, a 515 insane test piece put up by Tommy Caldwell in the Fortress of Solitude. And also, Carlo was the first person to complete, this is insane, the so-called Triple 14, wherein he did a V14, a 514, and a 14,000-foot peak in the same day. Oh my God. Now, Carlo's coming off of one of the most impressive years he's ever had on the rock, and at 35 years old, you guys, he is a new father, and he is just continuing to peak. I love this so much. The word mastery comes to mind time and again when one thinks about Carlo's accomplishments as a climber, and just the way he's a student of movement and of the sport. This conversation hits on all levels, and honestly, it might just be the most useful single piece of climbing content that you consume for a long while. Listen up. All right, quick little update from my world of training and climbing. If you care, if you don't care, just skip forward. But if you care, then I'll give you an update here. You all know I was out in Yosemite not too long ago. I had this whirlwind 48-hour trip. One of the things that I tried while I was out there was the Dark Side. This V16 that Carlo pulled up, his masterpiece in the Yosemite Valley, that's right there in Camp 4. And so I'm going to share a little video of me trying my first V16. Should get a good kick out of that. Maybe take a guess. How many moves did I get in? Did I even get off the ground on that? I guess you'll have to tune into the Instagram to find out. But coming back from that trip, I really decided to tuck into a hard training phase, as it's pretty hot here in Kentucky. I did get out climbing not too long ago with Eric Hurst, about a week ago, and God, I got my butt kicked. It was very apparent to me, and also Coach Hurst, who yelled at me and will be yelling at me at an upcoming Road to 513 episode, that I have let my endurance game slide a little bit too much, as I've been focusing a lot on strength, weightlifting, and heavy hangs, but not a whole lot of moving. So recently, and now going forward, I'm going to at least work in one, maybe two. The goal is two fitness days on either the tread wall or the lead cave in my gym. So anyway, one of the things that I did was get out into this lead cave that we have at our gym here called Rock Sport. I got out there with Dr. Thomas Cunningham, who's a past guest of the show, and we did some lead routes, which was really fun. And one of the things that we used while we were climbing was we did a little gear test on the new Petzl NEOX, which is their new belay device. It looks like it's a gree-gree. It's kind of an extension of the gree-gree line. It's made especially for lead climbing and those who do a lot of lead belaying. And it's really cool. I'll tell you a little bit about it. I posted a video on my Instagram with a little review, and I really, really liked it. One of the things about doing a lot of belaying of lead climbers is that you're constantly paying out slack. So you're using kind of a lot of shoulder muscle to pay out that slack, and oftentimes you're shorting the climber. But with Thomas, I tried to short him. I couldn't short him. It paid out very, very easily, almost with zero friction, almost like the old school ATCs. And in the trick there with the engineers at Petzl have done is they put this little wheel on the inside. So as you're paying out slack to a lead climber, it feeds out super easy. You don't need to block the device on the top. You can just hold the rope normally with your brake hand, and it just feeds out like a dream. And then if somebody takes a fall or calls take, boom, the camming device kicks in and it stops just like a gree-gree. So if you do a lot of lead climbing, or if you belay a lot of people on lead, I think you got to check out the NEOX. It really is an evolution in the belay device. They also, of course, make the gree-gree and the gree-gree plus. So they now have like a line of belay devices for top rope climbing, a mix of top rope and lead, and then predominant lead climbing. The NEOX is the one that's on the predominant lead climbing side. I loved it. I think you should check it out. And how did I do? Well, I flailed. I like 3-hung a 5'11" in the cave at the gym, and my endurance is absolute garbage. So I'm going to be spending a little bit more time in that cave and on the tread wall in the coming weeks here so that I can start my Red River Gorge season with some base fitness. And by the way, if you want to check out the NEOX, you can pop over to Petzl.com, or you can go to thestruggleclimbingshow.com/Petzl, and it'll connect you over there. You can also find the NEOX and all of the belay devices that Petzl makes over at your local gear shop. Petzl, access the inaccessible. Let's talk about shoes for a second here, because this episode is supported by SCARPA, and they just make the absolute best shoes in the game. Oh my gosh, I love them so much. I have been climbing in SCARPAs for a decade now, and I just love the way that they fit and they perform on rock and also at the gym. I've been loving the Instincts, the VSs and the VSRs on my project out at the Red, because they can toe into those little pockets and stand on edges so well. They heel hook like a dream. And then in the gym, as I've been climbing on the Moonboard and the gym set problems, I've been using their Veloce Ls, the lace-ups. They're soft. Oh my gosh, you can just feel everything. They're super dynamic. I feel really athletic in them. So look, whether you're a weekend warrior like me, who's just trying to get the most out of my time at the gym and out on the crag, or a pro like Sean Rabitou or Nina Williams, Nathaniel Coleman, Alex Puccio, Jordan Cannon, or Matty Hong, holy smokes, what a team. SCARPA's got you covered. They've been sustainably making the best dang footwear for climbers, trail runners, and skiers since 1938. I love my approach shoes. I love my climbing shoes. And I think you will too. Give them a shot. You can shop the whole collection over at SCARPA.com. SCARPA, no place too far. And lastly, just a big, big, big thanks to all you patrons and subscribers out there. You guys are so great. I could not make this show without you. Thank you so much. And just for you, I dropped a banger bonus episode with Carlo, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in just a bit here. But first, let's talk mastery with a true master, Carlo Traversi.
Hey man, how's fatherhood treating you?
Whew, it's busy. It's busy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to warn you, I'm doing it at home right now because the office is real busy right now. So there may be some baby noises here and there. We've got some ways to manage it, but just letting you know.
Oh, dude, it's all good. I got 2 snoring dogs at my feet right now, and they're always boning my audio. But both of my kids are old enough to be at school now, so my days are so quiet now between the hours of 9 and 3.
That's awesome. I mean, I'm a little jealous in some ways, but I'm also very much enjoying kind of the newborn phase and just like having a baby in the house. It's a cool experience, and not trying to like rush past it too much in terms of like thinking about the future, and just trying to enjoy it for what it is right now. So
Totally, dude. Totally. Especially
challenges as well, but you know.
Yeah, I mean, like the milestones come so fast and furious in those, early couple of years. It's like you blink and you're like, oh, she's sitting up, like it just like everything happens so fast. So it's good to be as present as possible in that. And you're only like a couple months in?
7 weeks tomorrow. So pretty early on here.
Not even. You look at you. You're awake. How many cups of coffee do you have that I'm not looking at right now?
I've kind of like dialed back my coffee intake the last like year or so. So I have an espresso machine. I'll do like a single shot of espresso in the morning, and that's kind of it for the day. So, and I've found that it like helps me regulate energy by like not having too much caffeine. And I used to be like kind of a caffeine addict and just like, like most of us, and would just go nuts all day. But it started affecting my sleep. It started like, felt like I was getting dehydrated, and it just, I've kind of dialed it back a bit. And same with a lot of other things. I think I'm definitely in my most efficient, healthy state at this time, but I kind of need to be with all the stuff I got going on. So
Dude, totally. I just feel like I've never been more efficient with my time than when I had kids, because you just like, you think you're busy, and then like everything, the whole paradigm shifts. And we'll probably get into that in this conversation here, because I am curious about
for sure
how you're going to look at kind of this next very big chapter of your life, which is fatherhood, and how that'll inform you as an athlete, as an elite athlete. But man, I got to say, like, even before we jump in, have been such a huge fan of your climbing, of your work ethic, of just, what you're doing with the boulder field, and how you look at climbing. I mean, from comps to big wall, sport, trad, boulders. I mean, I've just kind of always considered myself a bit of an all-arounder, kind of a jack of all trades, master of none. I think you're a jack of all trades, master of all trades. So a little bit different there, but so much respect. And I've been looking forward to this conversation for a long time.
Well, I appreciate that. And, thanks for having me on. I'm stoked to chat with you. And yeah, I mean, I appreciate hearing all that. I mean, obviously I feel like I'm constantly like a work in progress as a climber, as a person and all that, but it's always, I mean, it's definitely nice to hear that, people find some sort of inspiration from what I've been up to the last, 2 decades. So
much, and just crushing now. And, shout out to those of us that are a little bit on the older side of our climbing years, for you to have the year that you just had. And it's just like, it's inspiration on top of inspiration. And I called you an all-arounder just, a second ago, and I don't know if that's a pejorative or not in climbing. I mean, you certainly are, if you look at kind of, I feel like, what the pegs or the pillars of being an all-arounder might be. I mean, I don't know if one would wrap in like alpine or big mountains and this kind of thing, but if you're looking at like kind of rock climbing from comp to boulder to sport, trad, big wall, I feel like you've attained a really high level and a mastery in all of those disciplines. But is that considered a compliment, or in this day and age where everybody wants to be specialized and be like, the best at one thing? I don't know. How do you look at that?
Yeah, I mean, I've always wanted to be an all-rounder, but it was never like, oh, this is going to make me a really complete climber or whatever. It's always been based on just what I'm passionate about, and if the passion starts, not passion, I guess if the motivation starts to fade a bit for one particular style, then I'm pretty quick to like transition into another style and kind of dig into that a little more. And I guess I've always just been really stoked about climbing, and it didn't matter if it was boulders or sport, trad, alpine, rock, like longer adventures, endurance stuff, like all the full range of stuff. I've just been motivated. And so I just kind of follow my motivations and passions in that way, and try and just always be kind of, connecting with what I'm most motivated by at the time and just digging into those. And then if they kind of transition, then I transition with it. And, I've been lucky to have sponsors that are like okay with that constant like variability and changes. And I think I've just been lucky that I've been able to, hit the upper echelons of a lot of those different disciplines, because I don't, it's definitely not an easy thing to maintain like over time. And, as I get older, it's harder and harder to like maintain the same level in all of them. But I've found some, some tricks and things that have helped me stay at that level. But yeah, I mean, to answer your question, like, I mean, I didn't necessarily set out to be just like a great all-rounder, but I think just the motivations of just wanting to climb anything and everything just kind of led me to that. So
yeah, I really love that. I think that, following the psych is never a bad thing for those of us, most of us who are listening, who aren't paying the bills as climbers. Like, that's kind of what it's all about anyway. But also, in order to improve at something, it's really helpful to be really passionate about it and psyched on it so that you can put in the work. And you certainly have done that. I want to dive in and peel back on some of those kind of shifting focuses and chapters of your climbing. But we'll start where we always do here, which is not where the psych and the ease and the enjoyment are, but where the struggle is. And I'm curious from your experience and your perspective, what your relationship is with struggle as a climber.
Yeah, interestingly, climbing has always been a struggle for me. And I think that's probably what's led me into this path in a lot of ways. I was not like some, gym prodigy, like I started pretty early. I started when I was 13. That's certainly not as early as a lot of kids these days. A lot of the top climbers started a lot earlier than that. And so when I started, I kind of felt like I was coming in a little bit late, but not as late as other people, obviously. The people that I was surrounded by definitely all kind of started a little earlier, but I just wasn't very good when I started. I think I had a lot of determination and willpower to get better, but my technique was just total shit. And, I wasn't the strongest, but I think I was able to kind of push through that by just constant, just attacking my weaknesses and things. And I think that is, something that people don't talk about a lot is that, you can become one of the better climbers out there, or at least in that upper tier, even if you didn't start off on the best footing, as long as you're willing to embrace that struggle and embrace the fact that it's going to be really difficult. And I think I've always liked things that are hard, and I've never felt like I got a lot of reward out of doing stuff that felt easy. And so I think the fact that climbing was so difficult for me early on really made me into the climber that I am today. And now when I'm met with a struggle in climbing or a difficult route or boulder problem or whatever, that's what draws me in. It's not kind of what repels me, So that's all I'm looking for, is things that shut me down. And I'm just on a constant hunt for things that are going to be the most epic, heinous struggle, because that's what I enjoy out of it. That's what I'm looking for. And so I definitely am always chasing my weaknesses and chasing the things that are constantly feeling hard. And the minute things start to feel like pretty chill and easy, that's when I tend to start to like move out of whatever discipline I'm in, or start looking for something else.
That's beautiful. I'm so hyped by that entire thing there, and possibly because that's a foreign concept to me and probably a lot of people who like climb recreationally. Although I do embrace the struggle, and like I like a hard project, and I'm in the middle of the hardest thing I've ever projected right now, and loving every kind of incremental step forward and step back. But if there's a little bit of a common theme in the interviews that I've had with yourself and your contemporaries, it's that it seems to be like a preternatural draw towards this discomfort and this struggle. And I'm curious if you've put much thought into where that might have come from.
I think I really, a little bit. I think some of it is a little bit intangible, because sometimes I'm like, why am I doing this to myself, But I think that it's like, I'm always looking for these things that can like radically shift my like perspective and like understanding of like the world and what I'm capable of. And I think that if you go into something that is not going to be super hard for you, then the journey to accomplish it doesn't cause that shift in perspective, really, because you don't go through these trials of like learning about yourself and kind of digging into the depths of your motivation and like who you are, and kind of reconstructing yourself through this process of like, making it a reality. And I think that the harder things that we try and do offer us the best chance of like reconstructing a better version of ourselves at the end of all of it, and being and continuing to kind of cultivate this best version of ourselves. And it also is this, always at the end of it is kind of this radical perspective shift where I'm like, what I thought I was and what I thought the world was before this, getting into this process, and then now at the end of it is very, very different. And I kind of feel like I'm almost like a new person at the end of all of it. And the things that come easy, like just don't offer that. And I think that that's maybe what I'm kind of always seeking, and so I think that's what draws me to those more difficult, struggles, I guess.
Yeah, dude. What a cool kind of perspective. Essentially the Phoenix reborn at every one of these like struggles that you push through, and in climbing and perhaps in other areas of your life as well. I'm curious, as you look back, Because you said, you weren't like this phenom. It wasn't a Chris Sharma situation, right? Where it was just like, what? He's doing everything and everything's easy. When you look at current struggles, projects, it could be the dark side is, a very recent example, but could be many others. And you compare it to maybe what was the equivalent when you were trying to climb your first V5. How do those experiences relate?
They're different for sure. I mean, I think I was less patient when I was younger. And so, when I would struggle to do my first V5, it felt like it was taking forever, but it was probably, like the course of like, a month, a couple months of work to like get it, and it was like, so, but at the time you've only been climbing for maybe a year at that time. And a couple months feels like an eternity in terms of like the work that you've put in. Whereas now it's like I've been climbing for 22 years, 23 years. And, if I dig into something for multiple years, it doesn't feel like that much in the context of like all the effort that I've put into climbing over time. But I think, the way that you approach it is probably similar in some ways in terms of like the motivation and willpower and stuff. But there's obviously a lot more strategy and preparation and, with longer term battles, you're going to go through more cycles of like up and down motivation and like questioning yourself than you do, earlier on in your climbing. But I think maybe just the later ones are just more drawn out, but it's a similar like cycle where you're like, you have a breakthrough and then you get stuck and then you start questioning yourself and then you're kind of in the dumps about it. And then you have like another little, you keep trying, you have another little breakthrough and you kind of bump up a little higher on it and get a little closer. And then you kind of go back down again. It's the same process, that we deal with later on. It's just, I think now there's just less room for error now, on the harder end of the scale. Like you have a little bit less like give, but it's the same, and that's the cool thing I've always found about climbing is that, and I tell people this in the gym all the time that are new to climbing is that whether I'm climbing V15 or you're climbing your first V2, we're on the same journey here, and it doesn't change in that way. It's just, I'm a little bit further down the line, in terms of like what I'm trying, and maybe more people have gotten through this kind of level that you're at, but that doesn't change your experience with it. You should dig into it in the same way and appreciate your progress and experience with it in the same way that I would experience it on the harder end of the scale. And so I think it's a good reminder for people to just realize that in climbing, we're all the same in terms of how we battle with our projects and do that stuff. And there's no more value in what I'm doing on the harder end of the scale, I think, than what someone's doing on the easier end, because it's all just a personal journey of trying to master this, very odd thing that we do.
I love it. It's such good perspective. And I think that only somebody who's been on that journey to the point where you are, is able to look back and really have that real perspective, that real reflection, because you have to go through the V1s and 2s and 3s and 4s to get to where you're going. But it always feels like when we look at like the elite, the highest level climbers, that it's just like almost like a different sport, but it's just incremental, right? And I tell my kids that they're in guitar lesson and piano lessons, and like, you just, you got to pay your dues in the beginning. Yeah. And then with that becomes mastery, and with mastery can come ease, at least to some extent, which oftentimes when I see somebody like yourself climbing, it looks very easy. It looks very fluid, but a lot of work goes into getting there, of course.
For sure. I mean, that also is an incredible part of like spending a lot of time working on a specific activity or, a movement, is that there is this crazy feeling that comes when you've like mastered movement to some degree. And I think that I didn't realize what that could feel like until I got there. I think it was maybe after 10 or 12 years of climbing that I hit this point where I like on my good days, it felt like this effortless flow. Like my body was just, I didn't have to think about anything. It just knew exactly how to move and react and in every position and everything that I was doing. And that feeling, I feel like now I'm still trying to like chase that feeling now that I know what it felt like. And it gets harder and harder as you get older to hold on to that. But that, I think I didn't know that I could feel that way early on. And so it was not something that I was like driving towards. It was more just kind of like, I want to get better at this. But then once I felt that, it's hard to let go of it. It's because you really just want to feel that way all the time. And and then you're constantly kind of chasing it from then on out. But it's a cool thing because it feels like it's almost this reward for all the effort put in. And I never thought of like achieving a specific goal as like a reward for all that work. Like it wasn't like, oh, now that I've climbed V15 or V16, that's the reward for putting all the work in. For me, the reward always was like this ability to move on the rock really effortlessly and to just feel like perfectly at peace with like everything that I was doing on rock. And that was the most like just addicting, amazing feeling, you know? And I still get it from time to time. I'll go in the gym and I'll just have this like perfect flow session. And I'm just like, holy shit, this is like, I would take this day over any send of any project to just feel like that effortless flow, you know? So.
Oh man. Yes. And flow you do, my dude. I mean, like, it's just, when I think of flow, I think of Carlo. So I'm excited. You know, we break this into some chapters here. And we'll probably loop back to flow and certainly movement and technique, an area I know of particular passion of yours, but also of mastery. But first, let's geek out over training. And I think this is going to be an interesting one with you because you've got some maybe counter perspectives compared to a lot of the athletes that I've talked to here. But I won't load the question here. First, I'll start off where I always do, which is struggle. Yeah. And where has training been a struggle for you, or where is it a struggle currently even?
This is a hard one for me to answer. I'd say I'm not the most disciplined at training, but I think that I'm an extremely disciplined climber and I'm very intentional with my climbing practice. But the way that we look at training nowadays is in the context of like exercises that are done to like help your climbing on the wall. And like a lot of training now is thought of as off the wall.
Right.
And that has never been, it's never been anything that I've like really dug into with any seriousness. Like I've definitely had a program that I would follow that was some off the wall stuff that would keep me kind of in certain shape or kind of push me in a direction that I wanted to go. But I guess I've leaned mostly on just on the wall training most of the time. And I've found that, because I've had access and time to be able to be on the wall a lot, it's made it easier for me to just kind of prioritize just climbing and movement as opposed to like, something else like weights or hangboards or, other tools. Like I don't use the boards at all. I know it's like a big fad and not even fad. I think it's here to stay for sure. It's not gonna go anywhere. But I've climbed on the moon board. I've climbed on all the different boards, but it's not a part of my, even yearly practice in any way. Like maybe I'll climb on the moon board like twice a year at the most. And typically like I'll use the moon board as just like, oh, my fingers, I kind of want my fingers to feel a little bit better for outdoor climbing. And I've been climbing on really comfy gym holds a lot. And so I'll go to that to be a little bit slower with my movement, a little bit more controlled and a little bit more precise with how I'm grabbing things. And it definitely demands like a certain amount of a type of finger strength, I think, for that. And that's why I think I've preferred the moon board over the other boards is because it's the least like other parts of gym climbing. And so the other boards that are out there almost mirror what we already have in the gym in a way. And so I'm always like, if you have a gym that has really good root setting, why? You should just be testing yourself on the really good root setting that's constantly being turned over in your local gym. I think that the difference is that if you don't have good access to really good root setting, then those other boards like Kilter and Tension, and there's a, Grasshopper, the decoy board, there's a variety of them out there. I think then those can be applicable for your training because you don't have access to as many boulder problems as maybe someone else in a different gym. So that's how I've always thought of it. But
I think it's great perspective because you also run a gym, you own a gym and have you've been a setter, you've done all these comps. And so you do have a really good perspective on essentially what differentiates good setting versus poor setting. And unfortunately, I think there's a lack of good setting out there, at least on a lot of the gyms that I've been to. And so I can't see the allure on a board because, A, it doesn't get reset, and B, like you just kind of know, and it's standard, and it's universal. But what's very interesting from that last statement there that you made was that you very rarely climb on those boards, which is, typically when I talk to an athlete, I'll ask them about their training, and it'll either be, very regimented off the wall training where it's, repeaters and hangs and doing different weights and, lock offs and these kinds of things and then climbing. Or it'll be like, oh yeah, I just like to climb as my training. So I'll do 3 days a week on the moon board and then I'll get outside. So, but you're kind of none of the above, if I'm understanding correctly. The vast majority of your training is climbing on rock or on set problems at your gym.
Yeah, it's true. And I'm not claiming that I'm right, like I'm not trying to say like, this is how you should approach it, or like, I'm just trying to explain how I've approached it and what my perspective is personally for it. And I think that's important to differentiate that, because people do a lot of different things that work really, really well for them. And I think that that's awesome and shouldn't take away from that. I just know for me personally, I found that like certain types of limit bouldering where I'm like trying the same one move over and over and over again was very similar to like a hangboard session in terms of like how it was, applying different strengths and whatnot. And then if I finish my session trying to campus a couple climbs, then it's kind of similar to a campus board session, but a little bit more climbing movement focused, because you're grabbing a lot of variety of grips. You're in slightly different positions than being on like a flat wall. And that's the other thing that I've found difficult with the boards, is that you're not dealing with a lot of angle changes on stuff. You're always climbing on like a flat wall. So you're going to do well outside on really flat wall surfaces. But then if you have these weird kind of like changes in angle that you're going to find pretty much on most rocks, I think that you're not training those to the best of your abilities. And so I've always found that just seeking out as much variety, in the gym space and the outdoors as well is one of the best ways I've found for training. And I mean, I just, even in the last couple of years, I think my training has even gotten lower than what it ever used to be. And I'm pretty much just focused on like projecting stuff that we've set in the gym, and then occasionally using a spray wall to make up specific movements that I feel like I'm lacking and need work on. But a lot of it's, it's just based off of normal gym setting. So, and not really any campus board, not really any hangboard. I do use a hangboard now to like warm up. And I found that to be helpful to get my fingers warmed up, because I don't have as much time to like get in the gym and like do a full warm up process. Right. So I find that at home, if I warm up my fingers for a little bit, while I'm eating breakfast or whatever, then it can help, speed up my climbing throughout the rest of the day in terms of what I can accomplish. So I think there's uses for a lot of those tools, just maybe not in the same way that other people use them.
Well, yeah. And no doubt with the amount of climbing that you do, and others that I've talked to, Drew Ruana was a recent interview I had where he just said he climbs like 4 or 5 days outside on V16 and up. And he's like, that's where I'm getting my training, So yeah. I think if you have the ability and the access to climb on hard stuff that you're psyched on, no doubt you're getting the stimulus to your fingers and, your body and your core and your tension. If you don't have that access, then, you get into like kind of my world where it's hectic and the crag's a couple hours away. And so I've got to try to simulate it. But then there might be a little overlap here on the Venn diagram. And I'm curious what you might do if you're projecting something and you identify a weakness. Left arm lock off strength or something that like maybe you're not getting enough of on the climb or on the sets. Do you then try to isolate that and train that off the wall, like whatever, with rings or weights or something? Or do you find ways to address weaknesses just through climbs and identifying or setting climbs to kind of go at that weakness? Am I making sense with that question?
Yeah, totally. You're making complete sense. So my first thought when I can't do a move is not to think about the strength aspect of it. It's about how can I approach this move with a different movement pattern or different body positioning to better achieve the result that I'm looking for. And I think that a lot of people hit a snag where they can't do a move, and the first thing that they're going to think is, I'm not strong enough to do that move. That is the last thing that is on my mind. And I think that that's a better way to approach it, because I think that you have so many tools at your disposal to be able to figure out how to get through a crux move beyond just a getting stronger. And I think that that's where technique is and knowing how to like solve things with various techniques can be really helpful towards like progression in climbing. And I've almost never found, I mean, there are situations where for sure, like you reach the end of that road and you're like, okay, I do need to get stronger like in this way. And now I can start to apply strength to it, but it's certainly not the first place that I look. So,
man, I don't know, Carlo, because I just feel like the first thing I always say when I get spit off a climb or a boulder or something like that is just like, oh man, I'm just not strong enough. And so that's also something that you just hear, like it's a common refrain in climbing is like, oh, I'm just not strong enough for that move right now. And you're pushing a soft spot here by saying, you know what, you might be strong enough. There may be other ways to look at it, which I think is really exciting in the sense because it takes time to build strength. If you can solve a problem without having to necessarily go back to the lab for 6 weeks, if you can figure it out in other ways, I think that could be really exciting. And I'm curious how you go about that. So you get stopped on a crux. It feels like maybe you were too weak to pull a move, but you don't allow yourself to fall into that trap. How do you then kind of dissect doing that move with the strength, the fitness that you have?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you just can't even hold on to the hold at all, then that's a hard place to start, obviously. But there are times where I've found holds that I didn't think that I could grab. And then by adjusting where my hips are on the wall, where my body positioning is, maybe like a knee scum that you find that will allow you to hold on to it. And then once you can start holding on to it in that position, you can start figuring out how to move around it. And I say around it because I think a lot of people climb through holds and they don't know how to move around them. And I think Dave Graham is one of the best examples of someone who moves around holds rather than through them. And you'll see the strongest climbers in the world out there climbing through things. Like they grab a hold and they pull through it. Whereas there are really, really good technical climbers that will grab stuff and they will move their body around the hold rather than engaging it straight on. And I think that if you're always looking for ways to kind of move around and kind of swivel around the holds and basically using the holds more as like an anchoring rather than like something to just pull through to get to the next hold, then you're always going to find the easiest beta. And so even if you find the most efficient way to move around a hold, you're still left like not quite getting to it. Then that's where you'd be like, okay, I do need to apply a little bit more strength or whatever here. But I'm always trying to find the way to get around the hold rather than like pulling straight through it, And sometimes you will find that, you have an orientation of holds that don't allow you to the where the feet are and all the different, variances in the rock don't allow you to do that. And that's fine. But I'm always like, that's the end thing that you're thinking about. You don't start off that way. You have to attack it from this idea that there's a way to do this. There's a way through this that I don't need to just keep applying more strength and power to. And I think that even if you're really strong, if you applied those principles to your climbing all the time, you would end up being a more masterful, more efficient climber all around. You'd probably be better at on-sighting. You'd probably be better at, just doing things quicker because you're always looking for the easiest solution rather than just ripping through stuff. So.
Yeah, man. I think that's a really cool way of looking at that. And so as a way to maybe round out this training chapter because I'm going to loop back to this as we get into tactics.
Yeah.
So there's some real tactical mastery here involved. But, I heard you say recently that you feel you're probably the weakest you've been in the last 10 years, but you're climbing the best that you've ever climbed in the last 10 years. And is it a result of that movement of moving around holds the best you ever have? Or is there some other explanation for how you're peaking, but not physically peaking?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think my fingers are still pretty strong comparatively. I can still hold on to like just as bad a holds as I was able to, when I felt like I was at my peak strength. But I do think like my body and my arms aren't as strong as they used to be. And I know that because there's different, those different benchmarks. Like I used to be able to very easily hold a one arm lock off on like a 10 millimeter edge for a long period of time. Like I could just kind of sit there and camp out and it didn't really feel like an effort. And now it takes me like a couple days of doing it to even hold it just for like a few seconds and whatnot. So like lock offs have kind of fallen off. I used to be able to do a lot more one arm pull-ups, just, like a party trick style thing. Never thought that they were anything to like train for or whatever. Like I have a hard time doing a one arm now. Like it's not easy. I used to be able to do, pull-ups with a lot of weight added and I can't do nearly as much weight added. I think I was adding like close to 200 pounds at one point, just added weight onto me, and doing pull-ups that way. And that was way back in the day when I was just looking for extra bursts of power and stuff. And so I'd do that occasionally. And like, I can't even get close to that now, but But yeah, I think for a long time, I was getting stronger and stronger just by climbing so much, at least early on in my first 10, 12 years of climbing. And my technique was getting better and better. And then I kind of hit a wall where I didn't feel like I was getting much stronger necessarily, or at least it was really difficult to get a lot stronger. And so I started really digging into the technical side of climbing and really trying to improve my efficiency of movement and how I was moving on the wall. And the result of being more efficient is that you actually end up getting weaker because you're not choosing the more difficult way to get through things. And so I think it's hard to maintain both at the same time, because if you're constantly finding the easy path, you're not getting that extra training in that keeps you at that much, much stronger level. And I say that I've gotten weaker, it's because I think there was a point where my strength and technique were both at a very, very high level. I think it was maybe 2014, 2015. I feel like I was peak strength, and I also had like a very, very high technical understanding of how to move on rock. And now I feel like my technical ability has continued to improve, but my strength has fallen off a bit over the last, 6-7 years. But I've been able to still improve as a climber just because I've improved, in a technical sense, and been able to use the strength that I still have way better than I ever have. So, and just understand movement better. So I hope that makes sense in terms of like my trajectory through climbing and the way that I've kind of looked at it. But
it does. It's really exciting to me. I think I'm loving that, at least from my lens as like a podcast host, I'm seeing a lot of talk recently. Like I'm just talking like in the last like handful of months about movement, about technique. And so it's kind of hit this critical mass. You've been talking about it forever. Others have as well, right? There's cycles in climbing, it seems like. And so like, it was like all movement, and then like strength training came into vogue, and then it was like all training. And it's very interesting to see from kind of my seat in the conversations that I'm having. But I personally really love this emphasis on movement, possibly selfishly, because I'm so weak for my grade. Like when I test myself on my benchmarks and these kinds of things, like, you test your things or whatever. And like, I'm always like multiple standard deviations left on the bell curve. Like I'm so weak for my grade, which makes me seem it's okay. I'm getting by with some efficient twisting and movement and that kind of thing. And maybe I can continue to build on that. And maybe I never have to be strong for my grade. Maybe I can just keep progressing because I can just get better at climbing.
Yeah. No, I mean, you can for sure. I think that there's endless ability to continue to just improve in terms of your efficiency and movement. I mean, I do think climbing or strength is a component of it, and I think that if you do feel like you're moving at the most efficient you possibly can on whatever you're projecting, then and you're still falling short, then that's a time to add in some strength components that can be really helpful. And I'm not trying to tell people that you should just ditch all strength training in any way. I think it's important. I think the main thing is that in the last, I've seen it in the last 6-7 years, there's such emphasis put on the physical training side of stuff, like getting stronger. And it's because there's a lot of coaches out there. There's a lot of people that have put together, training programs. There's been a lot more training devices, training boards. There's an industry built around strength training within climbing so that you can improve. There is no industry built around the movement components, at least at this point. And it's because it's much, much more difficult to teach people that stuff. And you need to have people that are really, really knowledgeable about those things in order to educate. And it's not something like someone can just put together a hangboard protocol, sell it online, and you can see some improvement in your climbing. Like you need to have somebody that's with you and can walk you through what you're doing with your body at that time and how it can be more efficient. And you need somebody that's kind of been there and learned these things themselves. And it's a much more valuable resource, and it's a much harder resource to sell to the public. And I think
right.
that's what you're seeing, is that no one's quite figured out how to crack into the industry of movement, in terms of like selling it as like a program. I think that there are good resources out there. I think that compared to the training elements on the strength side, it's such in its infancy at this point, and I teach a lot of climbing movement stuff at our gym. And I think we have a good kind of elementary program built around it. But even in the process of developing it for the gym here in Sacramento, I've realized how difficult it is to train people to teach it in a really effective manner and to explain it in a really effective manner. And that's why it's hard to get people that knowledge, you know?
I want to shift and talk for a second here about nutrition. And again, you climb so many different styles. And so from comp to boulder to, the big walls and really hard single pitch trad to multi-pitch, there's a lot of different kind of fueling strategies and tactics that can come into play here. I want to explore those for a bit here. And first I'll ask you where nutrition has been a struggle for you, if anywhere.
I don't think nutrition's ever really been too much of a struggle for me. I think I was really lucky to, grow up with parents that were good cooks and also kind of preached a very whole diet in terms of like just eating lots of fruits and vegetables and just like whole foods and not a lot of processed stuff. Like I didn't grow up eating really much fast food or really any sort of like hyper processed things. And so growing up that way and I feel very, fortunate to have that upbringing because I know a lot of people don't have that and it's difficult to kind of break out of that cycle if you've been, raised a certain way. But throughout my process as a climber, I've just dug into what makes me feel good on a daily basis and what is simple for me to prepare for climbing, but also gives me like the calories that I need, but not anything extra that I don't need. And, it's changed over the years for sure, but like, definitely like, high protein tends to be, if I'm bouldering a lot, it's a lot lower carbs just because I don't feel like I'm like doing as much, that requires high carb. But then that shifts, at times when I'm doing big hikes to bouldering areas, then obviously I need to up the carb level like a ton. And so I guess I've always been aware about what the body's needs are according to the activity. And I've always kind of tailored my nutrition to that. But I'm definitely more of just see how you're feeling and how foods are making you feel and kind of always trying to check in with my energy levels throughout the day and making sure that I'm adjusting my food intake to, to compensate for my output. I eat a lot, like I eat a lot of food, but I do feel like I try and always eat like the right things, and not just filling myself with stuff that's kind of superfluous. And I've kind of tried to follow that, from the get-go, but I definitely eat a lot. I probably eat more than most, pro climbers, or at least I've gone on a lot of climbing trips with other pro climbers and I tend to be the one that's eating the most. So.
Right.
But I don't know, maybe my body just works that way where I'm just like, if I'm hungry, I'm going to eat, and I'm going to make sure that I have plenty of food throughout the day to just keep eating and eating. But
like, are you a handful of gummy bears before pulling onto a boulder problem kind of guy?
I love gummy bears. I will definitely dispose of some gummy bears for sure. But, there's a nutrition component to that where like it's the same as like people taking like a gel shot, it's like the exact same thing. You're getting that glucose hit if you need it, a little bit of quick energy when you need it. As long as you're not just like sitting in the car devouring gummy bears, like, the whole day or whatever, as long as you're using it at a time where you feel like it's going to be effective for when you're, that energy output. I mean, I've done a lot of research on it. I have a lot of friends that are really deep in the nutrition world. Alan Lim's a friend of mine who owns Scratch Labs. It's like a hydration company, and he's got a couple cookbooks and stuff and has, fueled a lot of the Tour de France riders over the years. And I've had a lot of discussions with him about, nutrition needs for climbing and stuff like that. And that's definitely influenced, the foods that I've picked at certain times and whatnot. Like I use his rice cake recipe a lot for like big outdoor days. So he makes like a rice cake that's basically like you just make like a bar out of sushi rice. And then usually I'll put like bacon, eggs, maple syrup, maybe a little bit of Parmesan cheese. And then you like press it into a bar. And then you take that out climbing with you for the day. And it's just like kind of a good blend of like carbohydrates, proteins, fats, a little bit of sugars and stuff. And it's kind of savory because I don't like to just eat like sweet bars all the time because you just get too much sugar. And so having something that's a little bit more on the savory end of stuff has been really helpful for like when I did the triple 14 day, like I think it's now been over about 10 years since I did that. It was like a huge monster, like 20-hour day in the Alpine or whatever. And pretty much just ate like an entire tray of rice cakes throughout the whole day, and I felt great, like never was hungry, never felt like any sort of energy bonking, never felt like that weird taste in your mouth where you're like, I've eaten way too many like Cliff Bars or sweet things, and And I mean, I think those sweet bars are great when you need them and you want some sugar and you want something sweet, but there's not a lot of bars that are sold out there that are savory in that way. And so having something that was a little bit different was really helpful. So, but yeah, that's definitely influenced a lot of my nutrition over the years.
What about for recovery, where we've talked about, going hard, getting a little older, we're getting a little ricketier. I'm putting myself in the same camp as you as I'm like, cruxing out on V5 here at my gym. But, recovery tends to take a little bit longer. We don't recover like we did in our teens and our 20s. And so are you fueling in any certain ways? And we can go beyond kind of nutrition and just talk about like what you're doing, to bounce back after a really hard day.
Yeah, totally. So it's changed for sure. I mean, I think I went 10 years without taking a rest day at one point. Like seriously, like I'm a climbing addict. Like and I've always been that way. And I think if my body could keep up with it, that's still where I would be. But I have found that as I've gotten older, like rest days are really important for me to be able to continue to like climb at a high level. But yeah, for a lot of my 20s, I basically just would never rest, and I would do double sessions constantly. And I just was fiending to climb. Like that was it. So it's just like, I just want to go climbing. I'm just going to go climbing. And that's just what I would do. And maybe that's why I didn't train as much, is because I was climbing so much that it kind of just didn't matter about the other end of stuff. But yeah, in terms of recovery nowadays, I mean, I definitely make sure that I eat pretty quickly after climbing, at least, a good amount of protein, carbs. I eat a lot of, chicken, rice, vegetables is like my staple diet in like a variety of different sauces or different preparations and whatnot. But I'd say that's, 80% of my meals is some form of that. I'm not vegan, vegetarian. So yeah, chicken, rice and vegetables is the way to go. And then I'll definitely, if I'm bouldering a lot and not doing as much cardio stuff, then obviously a little bit less rice, so a little bit less carbs. And then if I'm doing a lot more like, high output days, then I'll up the level of carbohydrate and stuff like that. I don't really do supplements much. I think that if you're eating a really good whole diet and you're eating enough of what you should be eating, then you probably don't need a ton of extra of what you're getting. You're probably getting all the amino acids that you need, enough protein, enough carbohydrates, all that stuff. I think that the supplements are great when you're in situations where you don't have access and can't cook, enough to be able to keep you going. But I think that those times should be limited, because I think you're still missing some things in those whole foods, that you're not going to get in the supplements. So typically, yeah, I'll supplement stuff when I'm traveling a little bit more. So bring like some protein drinks or, some veggie stuff that's like, the veggie powders and stuff like that. If I feel like I just don't have access to it. But yeah, that tends to be it. I try and eat pretty quickly after waking up, like a high protein that keeps me, kind of going throughout the day. But yeah, I'm not like afraid of sugar or carbs or anything like that. I mean, there's a lot of different ways that people approach it. And I do think that, certain people have different needs, based on their body type and what they're doing. And so I'd hate to, I don't want to tell people that what I do is obviously like the only way. This is just what's worked for me. And I think it's really good to kind of dig in to figure out what really works well for you. And I'm glad I did that at, in my mid 20s, because I feel like it's helped, maintain.
This episode is supported by Boulder Bear's caffeinated gummy bears, because climbing should be fun, you guys, and nothing says fun like crushing some gummies so that you can then go crush your project. Man, I love these things so much. I've been using them for a while now. They are friggin' awesome. I love that I can perfectly dial in the energy boost that I need right when I need it. So like if I'm about to hit a limit bouldering session over at my gym or trying to PR my hangs, I'll have 4 or 5 Boulder Bears, and then 20 minutes later, I am ready to rip some holds off the wall. Or on the other side of that, if I'm out for like a long day at the red or I'm doing some multi-pitch, I'll have like 1 or 2 an hour, and that's just enough to keep the energy and the focus leveled up. Each Boulder Bear has 20 milligrams of caffeine plus collagen, so you can stay energized, focused, and take care of your fingers all at the same time. It's a small company. I know the owner, Matthew. He's a great guy. He gives 5% back to climbing nonprofits, and honestly, it's just the best and most fun way to get a caffeine boost. You can pop by thestruggleclimbingshow.com/boulderbears to try them out, and use code STRUGGLE when you go over there, because you're going to get yourself a free travel pack plus 15% off your order. It's cheaper than Red Bull and way, way better. Hit that link in your notes to check it all out. Boulder Bears, all flash, no crash.
This episode is sponsored by Crimped. Crimped offers 75 different workouts created by world-class coaches and climbers totally for free, you guys. I've been using Crimped for years to log my finger strength and endurance assessments so that I can see how effective my training has been going. And I also love how easy and motivating it is to program my weekly training right there in the app with loads of proven workouts to choose from so that I can just keep things fresh. Look, if you're a self-coached climber, I am telling you, the absolute best and easiest way that I've ever found to train and stay on track is with Crimped. They group their workouts, y'all, into categories. So endurance, power endurance, strength and conditioning, boom, no confusion. I'm telling you, I use it all the time, and I am definitely far more consistent with my training when I've got the app keeping me honest and on track, and it just feels so good at the end of the week to close out those bars. You can hit that link in your notes or go to thestruggleclimbingshow.com/crimped, CRIMPD, to download it for free and take your training to new heights. Okay, let's dive into a big meal now of technique and tactics. And you are an absolute master in this area. And with that, one might presume there's just been a lot of ease and not a whole lot of struggle, but that may not be the case. And so let's start by just exploring where you may have struggled or do even with your technique or with your tactics out on rock.
Yeah, I think the biggest struggles that I've had is learning how to integrate my feet and my lower body more into my climbing. And I think that the most of my work as a technical climber nowadays is focused on my legs. I don't really think much about what my upper body's doing most of the time. It's figuring out ways to get more weight over my feet and then to utilize my feet and my footholds better than ever. And using, like, I try and think about the low body as like a point of stability, like kind of like the roots of a tree. And if you find ways to kind of root yourself in on your legs, then your upper body can kind of do whatever it needs to do to kind of to move through the next sequence and whatnot. And
that's definitely a paradigm shift, right? Because and maybe it's a beginner thing, because I certainly still in my head, like when I'm running beta or I'm just like thinking when I'm climbing, like you're just kind of looking at your hands. I don't know. You just think of climbing as this upper body sport, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like it's a myth to think of climbing as an upper body sport. I think climbing is more driven by the low body than anyone's willing to give it credit. It's your upper body positions the low body. So it can move the upper body, in a place that the low body now can push it where it wants to go. But then your low body also can pull you in the direction that you want to go if you know how to use toe hooks, heel hooks, other things correctly. You know how to pull with your toe. You know how to create like bicycles or other opposition with the low body can be really effective in that way. So I think that if you start to look and see how the low body can be more effective in your climbing, that's one of the best ways to continue to improve as a technical rock climber. And figuring out more ways to get more and more weight over your feet is going to be to your benefit, because there's only so much that your upper body can kind of handle. And there's a lot that the low body can handle that the upper body, will never be able to do. I mean, if you're walking around on your legs all day long, they're constantly trained for, keeping everything else upright and above you and whatnot and pushing you upwards, like you can squat down and stand back up. That doesn't feel that difficult. But then to ask for a normal person, you can ask anybody on the street to ask them to squat down and then stand back up again, but then ask them to do a pull-up and pull their body up that way, is going to feel way, way, way more difficult. So if you think about that for a climber, it's like, why aren't we using our feet more to drive ourselves upwards than constantly relying on our hands? And so I'm always just trying to use handholds as a positioning system rather than the means of getting to where I'm going. And that's why I've always found a lot of the upper body strength workouts to be adding more strength than you even need for most of the things that you're doing, because all you really need to be able to do is keep yourself close enough to the wall so that when you're pushing with your feet, you're close enough to the wall to grab the next hold. And you just need the strength to keep your upper body, balanced and stable over your low body while your low body does the work to get you where you need to go. And if you think of every movement that you're doing in climbing as just positioning yourself over your feet and then letting your feet drive you upwards, you're just going to be a more efficient climber just within that practice, I would say.
God, I love this. because A, it just makes a lot of sense with the big muscles that we have in our low body. But B, it does seem to be a little bit of a lost art, if you will. And this brings to mind Yosemite climbing, and it's something that you've excelled at and put many, many years in at. And if you talk to anybody who's climbed out in the valley, it's like the grades just don't apply. It doesn't seem like you could climb a 512 here at the Red River Gorge where I'm at and try and get on a 5.8 or a 5.9 out in Yosemite and just be absolutely flummoxed by it, totally stopped by it. And it seems like typically what it comes down to is footwork and maybe balance and nuance and technique. And so, I'm curious through that lens of Yosemite, what you've learned about using the low body through your climbing there in the valley.
Yeah, I mean, the granite in Yosemite is really slippery and there's not a lot of in-cuts. Like you just, the Red River Gorge, you got a ton of in-cut everything everywhere. So
right.
You're typically like, oh, it's an in-cut, I can pull on that and go. The valley doesn't have much of that. The rock is really slippery. And so a lot of your movement has to be focused on getting weight over the feet because you just can't pull anything with the hands. You have to get in the right position with your body and your hips and whatnot to be able to push yourself forward because there's just nothing to pull on to get you there. And so I think that I would argue that the 512s in the valley, if you're really technically proficient, are much, much easier than 512s in the Red River Gorge. And I think that it's just how you focused your energy on improving as a climber. So I do know people that aren't the strongest climbers, but have climbed in the valley a lot. And they can walk up 512s in the valley all day long. And if you took them to the steep routes of the Red River Gorge, even though it's a lot simpler in terms of like the hand motions and stuff like that, they would just be pumped at like the third bolt because it's just a much different style, So I think you just have to think about it in different ways and different, what you've been experienced, and how you've experienced different types of climbing. And I've been lucky that I've experienced a lot of different types of climbing and been able to like climb well in all those areas. And that's always been a goal of mine, is just to be really proficient in all the places that I go, whether it's limestone, sandstone, Yosemite granite. I think Yosemite granite really pulled me in because I was at that place in my life where I knew that I needed to get better technically. And I felt like Yosemite was probably the best place to teach me how to do that. And that's really when I started digging into just all of the stuff that I wanted to do in the valley. And that was probably about 10 or 11 years ago that I grew up climbing there, but I was away for a while and didn't climb there as much. And then in 2013 is when I came back and I was just like, this place is shutting me down because I'm not technically proficient enough to like do the things that I feel like I should be able to do here and that I want to do here. And then that's what I was just like, okay, I need to be here now, like as much as I possibly can. And then from then, until now, it's basically been every fall, winter, I'm in Yosemite trying to get better at that style. And I've found that improving there has improved my ability to climb basically everywhere in all parts of my climbing. And so I've found it to be one of the best teachers, kind of out there.
Well, I recall like a video of Adam Ondra being out in the valley and putting in a flash attempt on Midnight Lightning. And I mean, what is that? Like technically V8?
V8. Yeah, V8.
Right? Technically, right?
Yeah.
And he's like power screaming his way through this. And, he's like on-sighting V14. And so there is a lesson that Yosemite has to teach climbers of all styles. And for you to have put in the time there, the mastery is clear. If there's a capstone to it, at least at this point in your climbing career, it would be the dark side. And I'd love to just examine movement through the lens of the dark side, if you'd be willing for a minute here. And maybe for the listeners, you could just give a quick overview of what that route is like, what that boulder problem is like there on kind of smack in the middle of Thriller in Camp 4 that had been staring everybody in the face for decades and has been this project for you. I want to say you put in something like 7 years on it, I believe I read. And so maybe give us a little overview of the dark side, and then I'd love to explore movement mastery as it all came together on that one.
Yeah, for sure. So the dark side is it's a project that's been known about for a really long time. It doesn't really look like a problem when there's not chalk on it, because the holds they're not really like a lot of holds, I would say. It's like this crazy kind of rail system that transitions from down and left on the boulder to the, towards the center of the wall where it meets right at the top, it meets the force, which the force starts on Thriller and goes up a couple moves and then cuts left. And then this thing comes in from the far left side of the wall and meets up with the force at the end. And once chalk's on it, it makes sense. You can see these rail systems, and it basically starts off with like a pretty good crimper rail, and then that rail ends, and then there's two very, very, very small edges. They're very small and they're extremely sharp, but they're just kind of perfectly placed to get you to this next sloper rail system. And the sloper rail doesn't really look like a usable sloper until it has chalk on it. It's like for sure the worst sloper I've ever grabbed, but it's huge. It's almost the size of like a small surfboard, It's like, it's like bigger than a skateboard, smaller than a surfboard, but it's this big kind of sloper ramp. And there's no identifiable like hold on it. You just kind of like start finding where the crystals line up with your fingers and just kind of like surf your way across it. And then it goes into a little crimp section at the end with very, very small crimps. And then it leads into the end of the force where it significantly kind of eases up. And I looked at it for a long time as just like this kind of like, maybe that's possible. But it wasn't until I think 2013, 2014 that I like put some chalk on it. And it was like, this kind of looks like a boulder problem now, at least, but I couldn't really do many moves or nothing really kind of lined up. And I've just kind of checked back in on it over the years. And, you'd have a year, where climbing was going really well. And then you could maybe do a couple moves on the sloper rail. And then at one point I was able to do the whole sloper rail. And then I was like, got close on the crimp section crux. And then I was like, okay, this is something that can be done for sure. But never seen anyone, get close to it. And then Jimmy Webb moved to California in like 2017. And I think in that year or maybe the year after, he started trying it, and we both started trying it together. We both made some really good links on it, and then he got really close to doing it. And I think that was the first time where I was like, this definitely goes, and this is definitely something that I want to do, but I didn't feel like I was quite ready at the time. And then, over the last, 3 or 4 years since then or more, I've just kind of checked back in with it every year. And it slowly got to the point where I was just like, okay, now I think I can do this thing. And
so just staying on theme here, this is a bit of a leading question, but it sounds like just with the anatomy of the problem that it's not a brute strength, crimp strength, course. It sounds like it's a very technical, almost sketchy traverse. And I've seen photos, the photos that you put up there waiting on the film, but of kind of how you walk your way through this. And it really does look like you're just kind of palm dragging on almost nothing. Obviously you're engaging a lot, I'm sure, of the flexion there. But is it as a whole, you've suggested a V16 grade for it, is it just technical mastery that ultimately is what you earned over the course of the years to come together on this? Or did you unlock some moves, some beta or some strength in order to pull this thing together? Kind of what was it that pulled it all together?
Yeah, I mean, definitely there was a certain knowing where to apply power on certain sections and knowing how to apply power to like Yosemite and not slip off. But yeah, it's definitely like getting to a point of technical proficiency that allowed me to do it. And it's an anomaly amongst the really hard boulders in that it's like a shuffle. Like you're just shuffling this rail system basically the whole way. And I don't know of any other really hard climbs that are literally just like a hand shuffle, and it's like an extreme, like when I worked on it, I was like, I'm basically just on the Beastmaker 45s and then just shuffling to another set of Beastmaker 45s constantly. And so I was like, why would I hangboard workout? That's literally when I'm working on this thing, I'm literally just hangboarding all day. I'm not actually pulling on anything. I'm just hanging, and then I shuffle to the right, and then I shuffle my hand in, and then, and that's what's weird about it. There is one really hard pull move on the crux where you like grab this really sharp crimp and you have to do a deep lock off to get onto the sloper rail. But the rest of it really is just shuffling. And then what I learned was how to have my feet kind of pull me through some of the motions. And so the footholds are terrible. There's one pretty good foot, but it's kind of slopey. And as you pull up on the slopers, it pulls you off the foot. And so what I learned in terms of the technical side of stuff is how hard can I pull on these holds, but also maintain enough weight on my foot? And I think that that's a really difficult thing to do in climbing. And that's one of the more advanced techniques that I've learned over the years, especially from climbing in Yosemite, is how to hold on to a hold, but not pull yourself off of the feet. Mm-hmm. And it's a very, very distinct, like you can go to the gym and you can be like, okay, how can I pull on this hold and hold on to this hold, but at the same time, push myself down into the footholds? And I think that's a really interesting, practice to get into as a climber. And it's something that has really allowed me to, progress massively in a technical sense.
How can you train that in a gym? You just set like dual text garbage feet or no feet? How can you work on that distribution that seems very, not necessarily unique, but very critical to Yosemite style climbing? And whether we're talking about climbing routes on El Cap or Meltdown or, this boulder, that style that Yosemite forces is there. But for me, where I've got pockets and jugs and everything everywhere at the red, I would need to start to work on that nuance, I think, and understanding that distribution at the gym. And is there a way to approximate it?
Yeah, there's two ways off the top of my head. One way is just to start using worse feet in your gym sessions, period. Just not relying on those big, massive feet. You can do that on a spray wall. If there's a lot of jibs on the spray wall, then if you've climbed stuff on the spray wall, only use the tiny jib feet. Don't track. Don't use the handholds that we're using prior. Just use the tiny jibs. And that's going to focus a lot more energy on keeping your feet on the wall. The other thing is if you can do a dynamic move in the gym, find ways to start doing it with your feet staying. And so I've dug into that a lot, is that even if I can do a move in the gym, I try and do it as many different ways as possible. And so say if there's like a dead point where your feet just kind of barely come off, now every time you go in the gym, you should be trying that move over and over again while trying to keep tension on the foot throughout the move, slow the move down, and not lose the feet on it. And so I'd say is find those moves that you're just barely losing the feet on, and then figure out a way that you can keep the feet on there. And there's a lot of core strength involved in that, and you'll train your core while you're doing it, but you're also going to train the movement patterns while you're on the wall. So like people would be like, well, why don't I just go do a bunch of sit-ups and then I come back and then I can now I can keep my foot on because I've got a stronger core. And I'm like, well, your core in climbing is not just based off of like your abs and the center of your body. It's your entire muscle structure from the tips of your fingers to the tip of your toe. Mm-hmm. And your ability to maintain tension throughout that entire length. That's not just your abs. I've felt like I'm close to blowing my calf muscle because of tension, in my leg. And there's definitely times where my hamstring has gotten pulled because I'm holding so much tension on my feet, not necessarily just from a heel hook, but just like toeing into something or pushing down really, really hard on a small foothold.
Right.
And so those are the two ways that I would say. I think there's a lot of other ways to approach it as well, and maybe more practiced ways. But I definitely think that like learning to keep feet on the wall when you're doing dynamic movements is maybe your most effective approach to like having that kind of mastery.
Yeah. Dig it. I think that's a great drill that we can all practice, because you're always going to be able to find worse feet. Even if you're on the set problems instead of a spray wall, you don't have to use that problem. If you're climbing a V2, you can use the V6 feet that are woven within that part of the wall just to practice that. And I really do like that kind of being outstretched. Even on the moon board, I have a tendency to go dynamic and cut feet, and it looks cool, but it's not keeping me on the wall. And this is a good juxtaposition. I know I'm going to move on here in just a second, but like I could spend 3 hours talking to you on technique. But you're also like clearly a master of dynamic climbing and pogoing and all points off, double clutch, old man winter, insane moves, and these kinds of things. And coming from a comp background, so you're able to hold these two concepts simultaneously. And talk me through when one is the way that you lean versus going static, and is there a preference out of the box where it's like, I really try to do this first and then I'll shift to this if I have to? How do you look at dynamic versus static climbing, since you seem to do both very well?
Yeah, I mean, you have to practice both of them, you know? So like in the same vein of like that dynamic move that, you know, you can do the dynamic move now to try and keep the foot on, you should also do that dynamic move, but maybe try and skip the next hold and go to the farther hold. Or use lower feet and figure out how to generate more out of the lower feet to get you to where you're going, even though you're going to lose the feet. And so you can take identical boulder problems and apply different techniques and different forms of mastering movement to the same thing. You know, you don't need to find something new. You can take, you know, I grew up in very small gyms, in a very small gym in California. And, you know, we didn't have a lot of boulder problems to try out or to test ourselves on. And we typically would just climb on the same boulder problems over and over and over and over again. We'd try them in different ways. We try and skip holds. We try and, you know, jump through things, keep feet on, like all the different ways. And so I'd say you shouldn't be limited by, you know, the facilities that you have in that way, as long as you're willing to be creative in terms of how you apply your, you know, movement patterns to them. But dynamic side of stuff, I mean, it's hard sometimes to decide whether or not a more dynamic movement, you know, pattern would be preferable to more static. And I think you just have to try those things out on those climbs. The point is that you know how to apply both ends of it, and that you have both of those in your skill set. So I can move very slowly and very statically and keep my feet on the wall, but I can also go very dynamically when the holds are too spaced out for me to maintain that static positioning. And you have to practice both of them. You know, you have to be willing to take on both of them in your climbing, you know? And I think that's a hard thing for a lot of people to do, because I see a lot of people that they wrap up their identity as a climber in being static or being dynamic. And I know a lot of people that have gone really deep on the dynamic side, and you see them get on climbs that demand tension and demand you to be slow and stay on the feet. And then they kind of fall apart in those things because they haven't dug into that side of their climbing. And so when we talk about well-roundedness as a climber, there is a way to be more well-rounded technically, and you can't typecast yourself. You know, you can't constantly just think like, oh, I'm a static climber, like I'm just better statically or whatever. And it's like, well, you are now, but you need to dig into this so that you're better at that. But then don't make that now your identity. Just make that as like a skill that you now have, that you add to kind of the arsenal of things that are there, you know?
I'm curious your relationship on mindset and the mental game, and if there's been any struggles there for you.
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely had moments where I've like questioned myself and you know, what I'm doing and where I'm at and whatnot, and projects that I'm working on. I'd say that the mental component has typically probably always been my strength. I, for some reason, tend to be like pretty overly optimistic and overly confident in what I'm capable of. And I don't necessarily know where that came from, but it's something that I know about myself, and that, you know, like I always believe that I can do it. And I always believe that, and I'm kind of too optimistic a lot of the time in terms of like what I'm capable of. And even when I fail, I don't really let that affect me in any way, in that those failures typically are just more learning experiences that inform you for how you can approach it later down the road, you know. And I've had plenty of things that I've tried a lot and just gotten shut down on. And, you know, I don't ever think of those as failures unless I stop trying them. You know, if that's the only failure, is if you just give up. The most important thing you can do is just to continue to keep trying, you know, and trying it from different angles, just continuing to put the work in to try and, you know, to get those things that you want to done. You know, obviously there's things that like I just lost the fire for, you know, like projects or things where I'm just kind of like, I'm just not motivated to like keep grinding on this thing for whatever reason. And it's not necessarily because it's, you know, because I can't do it, but sometimes I'm just like, man, I just kind of feel like I'm not getting what I want to out of that experience anymore. And I think there's so many things out there to pick from, that if you're feeling that way, then it's okay to let those things go. And sometimes I've had things that I felt like I didn't have the fire for, and then maybe 5-6 years later, I'm kind of like, you know what? I kind of am feeling more motivated for that thing again. I'm going to go check back in. And so, you know, and then there's other things where I'm kind of like, you know, I don't know if I'll ever go back to that. I feel like I had like an interesting process with it. I feel like I learned a lot from it. So it wasn't a failure in any way, because I learned a lot about myself. But yeah, I don't know if I'd really dig back into it again, because there's just other stuff that I'm more motivated by. You know, we only have so much time. And so, yeah, in terms of the mental component, it's a little harder for me to talk about just because I think that's been more my personality, is just a little bit more like overconfident and more overly optimistic. And I know a lot of people aren't that way, and they struggle with maintaining optimism and confidence throughout the projecting process. But I think that there's something to be said for practicing, that overconfidence and over optimism, but then also knowing when to be like realistic with where you're at, and
Yeah.
I do feel like I've done a good job of riding that line of just knowing like, maybe now I'm like pushing too hard and that I'm not getting, it's almost getting more frustrating that it is like a positive experience, So
Yeah.
I've always just drawn it back to like climbing should be fun. And if you're not really having much fun anymore with what you're doing, it just feels like too much work and not like enjoyable, then I typically take a break and just be like, what, I want climbing to be fun. I want to enjoy this process,
I really like defaulting to the optimistic, defaulting to believing we can take on the hardest thing that we're about to take on, because it makes the process more enjoyable than going into it being like, oh, I'm not going to be able to do this. But also there's a boost that one gets, I think, in performance when you have that confidence and that belief. And if you got to fake it till you make it a little bit, or you can ride the stoke of the crew or whatever it is, it's tangible. You can feel it sometimes when you're sessioning and like you just believe. And that's certainly what has, I'm sure, fueled you. We were just talking about the dark side, 50 plus sessions, 7 years, you believed, you slapped some chalk on that rail that everybody had walked past for decades. And all of a sudden you believed there was a climb there when there wasn't a climb there, but you put some chalk on it and you're like, yeah, okay, I think I'm going to believe there's a climb there. So I really appreciate that on the mental side. I want to talk a little bit about fear and exposure. We've spent a majority of this conversation here talking about your bouldering, and that's understandable because you're an elite boulderer, but you're also an elite trad climber and big waller and sport climber. So I want to talk about maybe meltdown for a second. Beth Rodden is that 14C rated R, I feel like, right? It's the placements look thin and sketchy at best. There's many others that you've done as well, and so you can dissect some of these if you'd like. But in terms of climbing hard and climbing above gear and placements, or high balls and sketchy top outs and these kinds of things, how have you handled that side of the mental game of climbing?
Yeah, I mean, it's practicing, all those things. If I'm doing a big high ball or doing, magic line meltdown, some of those harder trad routes that I've done, practice and getting comfortable with things is kind of the first step, and just kind of knowing what you're getting into so that you're not putting yourself into like an overly dangerous situation is important. I'm sorry, do you do that like just practically speaking? Is that like, so you're like throwing a top rope on these things and figuring them all out? And okay, yeah. Typically, I've done some harder trad routes where I've, gone on site and just tried to like figure it out. And I've had a good time with that too. They typically tend to be a lower grade range, maybe in like the, 512 plus 513 range. I think I've done some 513s on trad that are like where I've just kind of gone for it, but you typically kind of know that the gears, as long as you pay attention, the gear is going to be pretty good, and that wherever you could fall is probably going to be high enough from the ground that you're not going to hit the ground. And that's typically my main concern, is that big falls haven't ever really bothered me as long as I don't hit the ground. So that's kind of my only thought process, is just like, let's just not splat,
Right.
But yeah, I've had a good head around heights and that aspect of climbing. But yeah, I've had to work on it for sure over the years. I've definitely had days where I go out and even on easy trad, I'll just feel like a little tense and tight and just like not comfortable with where I'm at. And, a lot of times I'll just kind of take a break. Like I'll just stop and just be like, maybe I'm just not in the right headspace today, because it's hard to like kind of snap out of that. Sometimes it's as easy as just like letting somebody else take over the lead and getting on top rope for like, for like a pitch, and just feeling more comfortable climbing and feeling more just comfortable with your movement and whatnot. And then you can kind of take over leading on a multi-pitch after that. But really for me, it's just been digging into it and putting enough days in practice and stuff to feel comfortable and confident when you're in positions of exposure and in positions that you could have fear. The other thing that I learned was about I think it's been a little over 10 years now, but I had a spontaneous lung collapse, and it caused a lot of anxiety around obviously not being able to breathe. And so I went through this like process of dealing with that anxiety that helped me really separate the fear that I was feeling from the reality that I was in. And because I would have these situations where I'd feel any sort of sensation in my chest and I would think that my lung was collapsing again. And it caused me a lot of fear and stress and anxiety. And instead of going the route of taking anti-anxiety drugs and going that route, I was just like, I'm going to dig into this and figure out how to control this, with just through practice and whatnot. And by going through that, figuring out how to separate what I was feeling versus the reality, I feel like my trad climbing and those parts of my climbing have gotten a lot better. And so when I approach like Magic Line or Meltdown, I can sit at the base and I can separate those feelings from the reality of the experience. And I can almost set aside the emotional aspects of it and just know that you put, I can go through each of the checkpoints and be like, well, I'm going to put the gear in here. If I fall here, then that gear is going to catch me there. And you just kind of go through like the very analytical approach that kind of helps you achieve like a good rational perspective going into it. And then when you get to the base, then I can like sit there and like feel the fear at the base that I know that I would normally fear or feel. And then I can put it aside and then just focus on rock climbing and not really think about being afraid and stuff. And I've found that to be just like something that I went through in life that was a good experience in the long run, because it's allowed me to have that practice, moving forward with more difficult or dangerous trad routes. So, and high balls and other things. So
I appreciate you sharing that. And I hadn't heard about the lung, and obviously an experience like that can really have a dramatic effect. It sounds like you used it ultimately to your advantage. Yeah. And aside from getting super analytical, like you were just explaining, were there other tools that you also developed that helped you to feel and work through that anxiety, but then move past it?
Yeah. I mean, just like, I guess, constant exposure to it and letting yourself feel it. And rather than like kind of hiding from it and then really digging into like what you were feeling at the time, and just be like, well, why am I feeling this way? Like what about this experience is making me feel this way? And really just trying to learn where those sensations are coming from and why they're popping up at whatever time, and then what they're causing you to do and how you feel like you want to react, but then figuring out other ways to react to it that are maybe more positive or more constructive, because you can get stuck in that pathway, in that mental pathway of reacting the same way to an emotion that you're feeling. And then by like deconstructing that emotion a little bit more and like understanding what it is that you're feeling and like what the root cause of that is, and then figuring out different ways of reacting to it that are more constructive, I found to be like a really helpful practice. And I think it would have been really hard for me to sort that out if I hadn't have undergone an experience that kind of forced me to do it, because I definitely felt like the anxiety that I was experiencing after that was like crippling in a lot of ways, like made it really hard to even go about my like day sometimes. And I just kind of knew that I was like, I need to sort this out, and I can't be relying on, anything other than like me in this situation to like figure it out. So, and it took a long time. It wasn't quick. I feel like it took me a year or two to really feel like I had developed those skills, like on my own to get through it. So.
Well, thank you for sharing that. It could be a bit of a vulnerable thing there, but I appreciate you opening up. I think we all deal with some anxieties and fears, whether we're climbing or just in life in general. So
yeah, of course,
to hear about kind of that exposure therapy and being able to feel it, see it, and then set it aside and get the job done is really quite motivating and inspiring.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize too that, I went through it a certain way, but I do think that, there's a lot of different ways to like, to work through those things. I tell people, this is what I went through and this is how I came through it. But if people are experiencing like anxiety or, depression or emotions that kind of follow in that realm, that there's a lot of, especially nowadays, there's a lot of places to, that you can seek information and tools about how to figure your way through those things. And I always try and emphasize that with people, is that there's a lot of different ways to get through it, and our brains all work very differently in how we deal with, traumatic experiences or different processes and stuff. And so I just always tell people that like there is a way through whatever you're feeling in that way. If you have fear towards a certain thing in your life, I always feel like there's a way to get through that and a way to end up on the other side of it. And there's also a way to make that fear something that's really helpful for you in the future, or how you deal with that fear becomes like a useful tool for you in the future.
I think this offers a great opportunity for us to now talk about our last chapter here, which is things that you're passionate about and that bring you purpose beyond your own personal climbing. Obviously, you're a new dad, and that's going to be high on the list there. But I'm also really interested in examining and exploring your work with the boulder field, the comps that you all do, developing. You've done a ton of developing around, and maybe any other issues and advocacy or issues out there that are of interest. So what is that for you? And we can talk about a few of them here.
Yeah, I mean, the gym is probably the biggest component of that because it's where most of my time and energy goes. And for me, starting the boulder field was, it was born from this feeling that I had experienced so much from the gym world and gained so much as like a community and like as just like my family, it felt like. But I also knew after 15 years of being in the gym world that what I envisioned for a space for people to congregate around climbing and learn from each other and to like experience climbing in a certain way, I felt like my vision wasn't mirrored in the gyms that I was experiencing, at least, around that time, like 2016, 2017. And so that was kind of where I was like, maybe I should figure out a way to kind of create something that is more in line with how I envisioned kind of where I want gym climbing to be and where I want the future of climbing to be. Mm. And also, how can I take all of this experience that I've gained from being a part of the climbing world and learning so much about, climbing and the community and whatnot, and how can I apply that in a way that affects more people, something that is more bigger than me, and that's kind of those kind of two components of what made me feel like putting time and energy into building a climbing gym would be, to benefit a community, other people, and something that's just something I could work on that was much bigger than me. Because for a long time, before that, I had been climbing professionally for 10 years prior to that. And there was like a 4 or 5 year stint where I was basically just nonstop on the road and just basically just seeking out objectives for me, like it was always about like, what's my next project? What am I working on? What am I doing? Right. And it started to feel kind of like this weird, empty pursuit. And not that I still don't have projects and things that I want to put my time and energy into, but I didn't want everything that I was working on to just be about me and what I was doing and what I could do for myself, And so working on something like a climbing gym that could benefit a lot of other people in that way became really important for me.
Well, it's really cool. I mean, at least from what I know of the boulder field, and I haven't been to it, but from what I've seen on your posts and heard about in various interviews and these kinds of things, is that you do some things a little bit different over there, and you've had a lot of experience with gyms, comps, setting, and community. And so from your perspective, as there's a new gym, it seems to be opening up every week around right now, which is by and large a pretty good thing. But what do you think the boulder field is uniquely doing that's a little bit different? Or what would you categorize as the most important pillars that the boulder field was built on compared to maybe all the other gyms that are out there?
Yeah, I mean, the community component for sure. Like we definitely try and do our best to make sure that we're a really positive, welcoming space for all climbers. And we want both, a V14 or V15 climber to be able to come in and have the same experience as like a brand new climber. And, when a new climber walks in the door, we want them to have the best possible experience that they can have as someone that has no idea about that climbing even exists, at that point. And And that's definitely, kind of one of the pillars, is that we want everybody that comes in to be able to have equally beneficial experience, but not just like, oh, climbing's fun. It's also something that, can connect them with other people that are like-minded in terms of how they view the world and how they want to, spend their time, but also a place where like everyone can kind of interact on the same level, whether it's older, younger, stronger, weaker, people that are interested in all these different things. And then the other component that I've found that was really important is the route setting side of stuff, in that I saw a lot of gyms, even though I feel like route setting is at its highest level it's ever been, like globally in terms of skill set and what's available out there. I find that the gyms, especially the more, the bigger, more mass market gyms, tend to dumb down the setting to fit what they think people want. They think they tend to set because they want new climbers to find quick success. And so they'll set stuff on the easier end of the scale where it's just kind of like, oh, well, make sure that people can get to the top, because that's, people love it when they can get to the top of the route.
Right.
And we're a little bit different in that approach, in that we, there's going to be stuff that's easy enough for somebody who's brand new to climbing to get to the top. But hopefully there's something within each route that kind of teaches them about how they can move better and how to get up the wall better, so that they can make it to the next step, or that they can be like, oh, that was, I think a lot of people will show up in the gym early on is they'll climb the ladders, the routes that people set that are just really, really basic and easy. But then when they want to get to that next level, they just get shut down completely. And we want to create a little bit more of like an even pathway through all of it, where they're slowly being taught different skill sets throughout going through the grade ranges that allow them to continue to make progress as a climber, both technically and from a strength standpoint. And then the other thing that I think we do a really good job of is we set really, really good slab climbs, which is something that's not typical in gyms throughout the country. A lot of focus is just on the overhangs and the steeper stuff. And I'd say that on any given night, our slab walls are the most popular areas of the gym, which is not something that I've seen in my 20 years of climbing. And so it's something that I find it's also something that no matter how physically strong you are, you can typically get better as a climber on slab, and you can spend more time on slab getting better as a climber, because you're not, like getting, more and more worn out, on this session on a big overhang. So.
And you're talking true slab, so less than vertical.
Yeah, true slab.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh God, there's so much to dive into here. But first, am I understanding correctly that you all don't grade your boulders?
No, we do a circuit-based system, and the point of the circuit-based system is that I don't believe that grades as they stand are a true reflection of a specific experience. Like, there's a lot of talk that like, someone will throw a grade out there, but that grade doesn't become a real thing until a lot of people can weigh in on it, until there's like a really a big consensus. And gym climbs, I don't feel like they stay up long enough to have a good enough consensus. And,
right.
As a setter, if you have a grade, you're going to try and slap a grade on it right away, but that grade isn't going to be accurate in any way, because we don't know how other people are going to experience it. That we know how the 3 or 4 setters that were forerunning it experienced it. But if 3 or 4 of those setters were like the same height guys, and then one was like maybe a girl that's slightly different, they still have a really skewed consensus over what people are going to experience on that. And so what I found is that we can slap a grade on it. It's not going to be right. And so why not just use a grade range? Because that's going to be, it'll help you decide what to try, which is the point of grades in the first place, is that it helps you figure out what maybe you should be getting on at that point, but isn't narrow enough that it starts to be like, create like animosity or friction around, expectations and other things.
What are the ranges then? How does that break out?
It's a 3-grade range. So like the easiest one is V0 to V2, and then they're overlapping. And so the next one would be V1 to V3. So all of our green climbs are V0 to V2. So that could be a V0, a V1, or a V2. And then all of our blue climbs is the next grade up, and that's V1s, V2s, V3s, and then it just kind of keeps going up from there.
Oh, cool.
And so they all overlap. And so there may be colors, and the point of that is that you don't want the overlapping is nice because you have different hold sets and different colors that you want people at, at different levels to be able to try out different things. You don't want someone who's stuck in the red range to only be climbing on the holds that are offered in red. So having the overlap allows you to have access to more things that are at your, the level that you're projecting. And then the overlapping is really nice too, because sometimes you don't quite know what you're getting on. And I think that sometimes people really surprise themselves by maybe they're trying like in the red range, it might be like a V5, but actually they think they're trying a V5, but actually the real difficulty might be closer to V7, but they wouldn't have tried it if it was a V7, if it was called a V7.
For sure.
So it allows more opportunity for people to surprise themselves in styles that they may not, think that they would be good at, or in difficulties that they think they wouldn't be good at. Because I definitely saw that over the years where people would be like, even one grade up, they'd be like, oh, I don't climb that grade. I don't think I should be trying that. And you're just kind of like, why not? Like, you should be trying everything here, even if you fail on it, And I think with the color system, people are way more prone to just trying everything, regardless of what the color of the climb is. So.
Yeah, dude, that really resonates with me as somebody who's been stopped at a certain boulder grade for many years at this point in time, which I'm going to talk to you about. Maybe we'll have another little session on that at some point. But I really like how that's structured. And how hard does it get? What's the top grade?
So black is our hardest routes, and that's V9 plus. Actually, it might be lower than that. It might be like V8 plus even.
Huh.
I know, I forget. I don't look at the scale, like the exact V, because, once you're working with a color scale, like we kind of know what the range is.
Right.
And like you almost just stop using the V scale entirely. Like you don't even think about it when you're setting or whatever. And so I don't remember the exact cutoff, but it's basically like V8 or something like that, or V9 plus. And we do have a lot of very, very hard climbs. Like I'd say, I can't think of any other gym in America that has as many probably V12 to V15 gym boulders that we do.
Yeah.
I'd say it's comparable to what you would find at like B Pump in Japan in terms of the quality and difficulty that we have consistently in the gym. That's been helpful to have setters that can set at that level, but also I think it's really good to have it because it brings in stronger climbers that then people watch and are inspired by, and they can see how they move. And so it's a great example for climbers that are at the lower ends of the scale. And then I also think it's great for people that are climbing or newer to climbing, because they can try things that are in this insane difficulty range if they want to, and have an idea of what that's going to be like in the future and what to work on. I know that when I started climbing, I did not hesitate to jump on the hardest possible things that I could find. I think my first trip to Yosemite, I tried Dominator for like an hour and I could barely get off the ground, but it didn't stop me from just attacking it with everything I had, and it wasn't until 20 years later that I actually even climbed it, So I think it's cool to have that level of difficulty, even if you're not at it,
Totally. Yeah, man. Really cool. Well, congratulations. Whenever I can make it out that way, I can't wait to check it out. It just seems
let me know.
So much right there, from the setting to the community aspect, how welcoming it is. It's really great. So congratulations. And I want to take a second to talk about the future, not just of the gym here, but for you, because, God, you just had this incredible accomplishment with the dark side and have been at boulders, it seems like, for a season. I think, if I'm recalling, it's maybe been a few years since Magic Line. And so as you look forward here in 2024 and beyond, where is the psych taking you?
Yeah, bouldering will always still, bouldering basically always stays at like a certain level for me. And it's always a part of my practice, I guess, is that most of my climbing will always probably just be bouldering. But this year, I'm definitely psyched to dig more into route climbing, whether that's kind of like alpine, multi-pitch, trad, the whole sport, the whole kind of range of route climbing stuff. I have a couple, things that I'm psyched, projects that I want to kind of dig into that I've had on my mind for a while, that I just want to put some time and energy into and see where they're at and where they're going to be in the long run. None of them feel like imminently close, but they're all kind of like probably multi-year projects for me that I think will really level up that side of my climbing. But yeah, I mean, I do feel like my endurance is really bad right now, but I also know that that's usually the quickest thing to come back for me. So I think, I've started doing some circuits in the gym and, doing a little bit more like volume just to kind of like get myself up to speed in that way. But yeah, route climbing is definitely hopefully going to be the majority of my focus the next year or two. So.
Yeah, sick, dude. I cannot wait to see what this year has in store. As a route climber myself, I'm really pumped to see what you sink your teeth into. By the way, just coincidentally or ironically perhaps, I'm trying to climb my first 13A right now, which is called the Force, and it's at the dark side. So, nice. We're both in our own worlds here of the dark side and the Force. You've done yours. I just need to do mine.
Totally. Yeah, no, that's a great route. I think I've done that route. I did that one a long time ago in the red, and that's an amazing wall and a great project to have. And I miss the Red River Gorge. Hopefully I can make it out there sometime this year. I really miss that place. It's just such a fun style of climbing and just and just an amazing place to be. So just a good community out there too. So hopefully I can run into you out there, but good luck on the project, man. I'm stoked for you.
Thank you, man. It's been so fun. It's teaching me so much. I did not pick low hanging fruit. This is, it's not my style. I'm embracing my inner Carlo here and going after the thing that I knew was going to be a struggle, but it was going to teach me the most. And I'm totally psyched. And if you do come out here, please hit me up. My wife and I have a cabin there. We make it available if it's not rented to friends and family that come in. And there's a good crew coming out, kind of like an out west crew this season that'll be coming through a little bit here and there. And I've gotten to climb with a few former guests, and so I'd be hyped to meet up if you can make it out this way.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. You said that I appreciate the offer and stuff like that, and I would love to climb with you out there. That'd be great. You were mentioning your project is not, or the Force is not in your style. What about it's not in your style?
Well, there's like two defined cruxes, like bouldery cruxes. So I've been, as a boulderer, I wouldn't consider myself much of one, but my entry point into climbing was traditional climbing out west. I lived in LA and I spent a lot of time like at Talkeets and Suicide Rocks and Joshua Tree and kind of like the Southern Sierra. And so very like sub-maximal garbage, gear placements, wasn't trying to push any hard moves, didn't want to take falls. And then we moved to the red a handful of years ago. And so it was like a real big like record skip, like we're different style. And so it's taken me a while to get used to that like pumpy overhung. Anyway, there's a long-winded way of saying, like, I guess if I were to identify with a style, it would be kind of slower, more like 3 or 4 finger drag, kind of paddling on jugs, for a long time. And the Force has what's probably like a V5 or 6 crux, like kind of at the 4th bolt, and then maybe like a V4 red point crux, which is where I'm falling consistently now. I go from the ground to the last couple of moves before the chains and just come off.
Yeah.
And so it's like kind of that top end power. There's like lower hanging fruit in the 13A range where it's more like jug hauls for days that I think I probably could have put down, but who knows? I haven't tried them, so like maybe not. But it's the hardest grade I've tried to climb, so it's okay that it's a struggle. But I think I've already learned a lot. Like I'm now consistently making it through the hardest moves. Like I don't remember the last time I fell, and I've never climbed a V6. At outside or at the gym or on the moonboard or any of that. And if it's a V6 on the Force here, I don't know, it could be a V5 or a V5 plus or whatever. In any case, if I'm doing that represents a pretty big level up in that kind of like try hard, but it's still stopping me at the top.
Totally. I mean, it sounds like if you're that close, it's just like an efficiency thing, You just got to figure out how to like keep ironing out like the little things that are, making it slightly more inefficient, but I like that part of the process. It's fun. It's fun to whittle down that last little bit of efficiency out of something, like you feel like you're like just right there, but you like have to sort out one last little thing to make it work. So I like that part of the process. So
like, I appreciate it. Like, cause in my mind, I want to think like, oh, it's just a little more fitness. It's a little more, moonboarding or a little more on the tread wall. Totally. But if this conversation has taught me anything, it's my feet. If I can just put a little bit more, if I can put 1% more on my feet through the, 80 feet up to where I'm popping off, I'll probably have what I need in order to get to that last, glory jug.
Do you feel like you get like anxiety at the end of the route? Like, you're getting close, but then you start like paying attention a lot to like how pumped you are and start feeling that way? Because I think there's like mental tricks to that where like, I mean, I've felt that for sure, but there's like ways of like settling yourself down, because I know that as you get closer to the chain, sometimes your heart rate starts to go up because you know you're getting really close, but then you start like getting afraid because you feel the pump, and then you start doing that calculation in your head where you're like, do I have enough left to get there? You know, but then in the process of doing that, you're actually speeding up your heart rate. Everything's, you know, going more and more and more. Sometimes I'll play a trick where I'm like, I'll look up at the wall and I'll pretend like I'm going 20, 30 feet past the chains. Like I'm going there. Like the chains are just a part of this. So approach the route or whatever you're doing with that entirely in mind of like, that's not where the route ends. Like I'm going here. And so it's a way to trick you to not have that like emotional response to like being close to finishing. Cause I'll try and finish a route with the idea that like, you know, I'll get to the chains and I'll sit there and shake at the chains and just pretend like I'm going to keep going. Like I'm going to keep going, you know, even though I'm at the chains. And it's an interesting practice of like tricking yourself to not feeling that way about it, you know? So it's something that I've done before where I'm like, it actually helped like slow the heart rate down and like settle in, and actually makes you more efficient like in the finished parts of the route because you approach it like it's more at the start, you know?
Oh man, I really love that. Dude, I was just out there yesterday, so I'll take it. I'm going to head back out there this weekend, but I like that mental kind of trick. And also typically like I'll try to fire a red point go, and then it, you know, I'll come off and I'll rest for a minute, and then I'll do like a low point or a link. And what I've been doing is getting up to the chains and just like clipping in and taking. But I think I'll implement what you just said there, which is, you know, on that link, get up there, clip the chains, but just like, that's just another bolt, and just, I'll hang there and I'll shake. And like, I probably could make like one or two moves past it, you know, like it's close to the top, but I could start to psychologically teach myself like, no, I can climb past this. Cause I do think part of it's mental, you know, I mean, I'm sure a significant part of it's mental where I'm just getting close and I'm like, oh, this is where I always fall. I'm so close. So yeah, man, I'll take all that to heart and I'll give it hell out there. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man. Good luck. I'm psyched for you. That's rad.
Yeah. Thank you so much, dude. I was just so inspired by this entire conversation, man. Congratulations on all you've accomplished and just your outlook in general. Good luck with the next big struggle, which is fatherhood, but also
for sure.
the ultimate reward. And I can't wait to see what you're going to be up to this year. Please keep us posted over here.
I will, for sure. Thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it. It was great to chat with you. And yeah, keep doing your thing too, man. It's rad.
All right, that clips the anchors on this episode here with Carlo. Man, what a great guy, and just a true master of many disciplines of this sport that we all love so much. His positivity and stoke, combined with such a unique way of looking at struggle and tactics and movement and climbing, I found it all so dang impressive and motivating. I hope you all did too. I mean, this idea that Carlo's proven time and again that we can become better and better without having to get stronger and stronger, it's just like really exciting for me. I mean, you know, I'm constantly working on getting more and more fit. I think that's one of the most fun parts of our sport, but just that we can unlock higher levels of performance without having to go and do like 6 months of specific training just through mastery or at least improvement in movement. Man, I just find that so dang motivating. I'm going to reference this episode time and again, and I'm also going to reference his banger bonus episode time and again. You all haven't heard it yet, but I just dropped it. And in it, Carlo talks about how climbing is far more of a pushing sport than a pulling sport, and he goes into details on that, including some drills that he does. He shares a trick to getting better at gym climbing specifically. He talks about why he avoids full crimping and what grip type he prefers when he's climbing hard, whether he prioritizes strength or endurance when it comes to preparing for hard on-sites, what he's learned from Jimmy Webb, the new class of young climbers that he thinks are positioned to push the cutting edge even higher, and so much more. You can get instant access to all of that right now at zero cost, actually, with a free trial over at patreon.com/thestruggleclimbing-show, or right there in your Apple Podcast player if you are an iPhone person. And you're also going to get instant access to more than 60 hours of other bonus content featuring the best of the best. Adam Ondra, Chris Sharma, Nina Williams, Alex Honnold, and so many more athletes and coaches that have been on the show here. Plus, pro clinics on stronger fingers with Dr. Tyler Nelson, advanced bouldering with Allison Vest, moonboard with Ravioli Biceps, performance hacks with Hazel Finley, and so many more. It's all there for just a few bucks a month. or actually zero cost right now with that free trial, so you can try it before you buy it. Although, honestly, your support as patrons and subscribers is really what helps to keep this thing going. So if you got a few bucks, I certainly would appreciate your help as I'm jamming away here in the podcast/utility closet. Thank you. I love you. Big thanks and appreciation to all of our show sponsors who have brought you this episode here at zero cost. Way to go. You can check your show notes for links and special discounts from those guys that are only available to Struggle listeners. And there's some great discounts there, so check them all out. Actually, you can see all of the show's brand sponsors and special deals by popping over to thestruggleclimbingshow.com/deals. Hey, did you know that The Struggle is carbon neutral in partnership with the Honnold Foundation? Well, you do now, and it feels pretty good for me to write that check every month. They're doing such amazing work to bring clean energy to communities around the world. Y'all can get inspired and learn more about their amazing work over at honnoldfoundation.org, and toss them some love if you can. They're doing awesome stuff. And lastly, The Struggle is a proud member of the Plugtone Audio Collective, a diverse group of the best, most impactful podcasts in the outdoor industry. The show is produced and hosted by me, Ryan Devlin, and edited by the wonderful Glen Walker. All right, that clips the anchors on this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in and supporting the show. If you want to do something that helps me out for zero cost, you could rate and review the show wherever you listen, or just share this with one of your climbing friends or the gym that you climb at. It really helps to get the word out there. I appreciate it. I hope your training and climbing are going great, and if you are struggling like me, well, just remember the struggle makes us stronger.